Hey gang, welcome back to another video. Now over the years, a majority of the props I've made have had some degree of metallic finish, whether it was an all-metal droid head or a helmet with chipped paint exposing a metallic base. But I realized that I've never actually shown this process start to finish. So in this video, I'm going to solve that problem, plus I'm going to tackle a project that I've been kicking around my workbench for the last 3 years. So let's get into it.
Before I get too far, it's important that you understand the following. The key to any good metallic finish is prep work. This is absolutely something you cannot cut corners on, because once your metallic paint hits the surface, it will show every single blemish on the surface of your part. That said, here's how I go about prepping my surfaces. I'll grab a bucket of water and a few different grits of sandpaper and the prop to be painted. In this case, a thermal detonator from Return of the Jedi, which had already been sprayed with primer and allowed to dry. I'll start with a lower grit paper, like 200 grit, to knock down any major inconsistencies in the primer layer, making sure to rinse both the prop and sandpaper frequently so that I can see what the surface looks like. I'll alternate between all of the pieces, giving them time to dry, which will usually expose any areas that may need a bit more help. When it looks like I've got a uniform surface on all of my pieces, I'll switch to a higher grit sandpaper and repeat. For this prop, I started with 200 grit and followed it up with 320. You can repeat the process with increasingly higher grit papers, but because this prop looks like it's been banged around a bunch, I'm going to stop at 320 and will give all the pieces sufficient time to dry. For the next step in the process, I'm going to need a Lazy Susan. I like using this one that I made for when I'm working on helmets. It gets the prop up off of my bench and leaves plenty of room for me to paint the undersides of the prop. Then I can rest the first piece on top and will dust the surface with a gloss black enamel spray paint. And once I've got an even first pass, I'll apply a second heavier coat to build up to a gloss finish. This base layer can change the tone of your final metallic finish. Darker colors look different from lighter ones, so you may want to compare base colors before starting on your final piece. When I'm happy with how the gloss black looks, I'll set the first piece aside and switch to the second half, repeating all of the same steps. What I'm shooting for is a glossy reflective surface that I can see myself in, like this. Now I can move on to any remaining parts. This gloss paint will dull slightly as it dries, so if you're looking for a mirror chrome finish, you'll want to apply a high gloss clear coat to the parts before applying the metallic paint. Now I didn't want a mirror finish on this prop, so once the gloss black was dry, I could grab my metallic paint and my airbrush and get down to it. This paint, as with most metallic paints, requires low air pressure, around 15 to 20 psi, so I'll dial down my compressor, put on my respirator, and start laying down my paint. You'll want to keep your airbrush moving at all times to prevent unwanted buildup and slumping in your finish. And just like most aerosolized paints, you'll want to apply it in multiple thin layers to build up to your final finish. Once the pieces are coated and have had a chance to dry, it's time for a gloss clear coat. But before I do that, I'm going to give them a quick buff with a bit of cloth. This will knock off any uncured paint particles and dust that I don't want trapped in my final finish. With all the pieces buffed, I can move on to the gloss clear coat. I'll be using Alclad 2 Aqua Gloss, but there are others that are compatible with our metallic paint. It's important to note that this clear coat will dull the shine a bit, but more importantly, it will keep it from being tarnished by fingerprints and will act as a protective layer between the metallic paint and any additional weathering I may do to this piece. So with my compressor again dialed down to 15 psi, I'll apply a few medium coats to lock in my shine, and then we'll set it aside for 6 hours to fully dry. It's the following day, and with the clear coat completely dry, I was able to assemble the prop and we'll do a bit of weathering. Because weathering. I'm using my tried and true raw umber and some black oil paint because I find oil paints are easier to get into all of the recesses, easier to blend, and have a longer working time than acrylics. These paints will get worked across the surface of the prop until I'm happy with how it looks, and then I can set it aside to dry, and we'll call this one finished.
Now, it took 3 years, but I have to say I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. Now, you should know that there's a variety of ways to accomplish a really good metallic finish, but I think this one is probably the most user-friendly and is the one I use most often. Well, that's going to do it for this one. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, but most importantly, go make something.